Hello, Com 4800 students, and welcome to week 12 of the semester. I hope you all had a great spring break and are ready to forge ahead in the last few weeks of our spring semester here at WMU to finish up our course in diversity and inclusion, and particularly in how to advocate for diversity and inclusion and how to teach diversity and inclusion to our fellow students and to our coworkers as we go forth into the world. This week we're going to be doing a discussion board, and you will find the instructions for that discussion board right on the discussion board itself. So you can go to the communications menu and discussions and bring up that board, and the requirements for the board are listed there. But before you go there, I'd like you to do a couple of things. First of all, go to the article in module 11 on resistance and read it very thoroughly. That article will be the basis for our discussion this week, and that article talks about different forms of resistance that students sometimes exhibit toward new ideas or ideas about politics or racism or things like that. And as we do our project for Dr. Stacy Perryman Clark, we have to account for the fact that not all WMU students might be as enthusiastic about the ideas of diversity and inclusion as we ourselves are. Some students might be very resistant to taking a course that they feel is not for them in one way or another. So I'd like you to read that article really thoroughly and pay attention to the three kinds of resistance that the authors talk about and how those three kinds of resistance might crop up in our projects and how we want to be aware of that and account for it and perhaps mitigate against it. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of the three kinds of resistance here, but you'll need to read the article thoroughly to get all the information you need for the assignment. You'll see that the first form of resistance that the authors talk about is worldview protection, or resistance coming from the feeling that what you're being taught goes against your view of the world. So read the examples carefully. One example that I think is good is many people hold the worldview, especially in our country, that life is a meritocracy, that everything's based on your own merit, and that it's an even playing field and everybody has an equal chance. That might be somebody's worldview. So when you talk about issues of privilege and diversity and inclusion, that might collide with a worldview like that. So as you read the article, think about worldviews that people hold based on things they were taught in their family, for example, or things we've taught our American values, and how those might create barriers to accepting messages about diversity and inclusion and messages about why they might want to take a course in African studies or African American studies. The second kind of resistance is target group resistance, and that's when people feel like they're part of a group that's being targeted by the discussion. So a good example of that is when we talk about white privilege. Some white students are very resistant to the idea of white privilege. They might not think that there's much racism in their immediate world, and so a kind of a barrier goes up toward hearing those messages and participating in that discussion. Also, if a class discussion surrounds LGBTQ plus individuals or individuals of a particular socioeconomic group, for a couple of examples, and the students in the class belong to those groups, they might feel defensive against hearing or participating in those discussions. So again, think about how target group resistance could come into play in this project that we're trying to do. The third kind of resistance that the authors talk about is narrative resistance. And this is a kind of resistance that can happen when the message that you're receiving bumps up against the shared narrative of the society or culture that you belong to. So for example, imagine that you work for a company that has a really strong reputation for being inclusive, and Then you hear about some incidents that have happened where people were being discriminated against. You might have a hard time believing that or accepting that or even looking at that objectively because it goes against the narrative that you believe. So think about the narratives that are in place at WMU about what a liberal arts education means, what kinds of things a student should learn about in college, and how those might make a student resist the idea of taking a course that is outside of their curriculum or outside of their comfort zone. So go to Module 11, read that article thoroughly. I think you're going to find it really interesting, and it sheds some light on this idea of resistance, which we haven't spent a lot of time talking about yet. But the fact that taking African studies or African American studies courses for a lot of students might be something that they feel resistant to for any number of reasons. They might not see the benefit. They might think it's way outside their program or way outside their comfort zone. And as you read the article, think in terms of our project that we're doing and what we could do maybe to mitigate these three different forms of resistance. And I'm eager to hear your reflections on that. Also, our survey is going on right now and we're getting a lot of good responses. If you have not yet sent out the link to some fellow students, please do so. We are getting responses coming in, but we could always use some more. Sometime about midweek, I'm hoping to send you a link to the summary responses so you can see what the feedback has been and start to pick it apart and analyze it. And I'll get the directions for the analysis paper up very soon as well. I'm really excited to forge ahead toward the end of our semester. So for this week, you're going to read that article in Module 11 and examine those forms of resistance and really reflect on how those might play a part in the project that we're doing. Okay, if you have any questions, concerns, problems, issues, enlightening moments, please send me an email and I'll talk to you all very soon.